Hey, welcome to part three of the Royal Kingdom. In this last part, we'll talk about some of the secondary features of the Davidic kingdom. They give us some background in reality, a lot of background into Catholic teaching today. So let's start. The first of the secondary features is the image of the Queen Mother. Um, that's a really important image because a lot of Christians who are not Catholic, at best, sometimes look at the Catholic understanding and emphasis on Mary um, as an intercessor, a model disciple, but also as the Queen of Heaven. And they think it's a little bit strange and often think that, well, it's almost like Catholics put her in the way of Jesus, or she stands maybe a little bit too close to Jesus in Catholic devotion or spiritual life. But it helps to know a little bit about these secondary features. So let's take a look at the model in the Old Testament of a king with his mother. So First Kings chapter 2. So Bathsheba went to King Solomon. So Bathsheba is David's wife and Solomon's son. And now this story begins where Solomon now is king. Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him on behalf of Adonijah, and the king rose to meet her and bowed down to her. Then he sat on his throne, and he had a seat brought for the king's mother, and she sat on his right. What's really important is not how I mispronounced uh, that particular name. What's really important is this: when Bathsheba, the mother of the king, entered into the court of the king, unlike with everyone else who would bow before the king rose out of his seat to meet her. And then the king bows to her, not because she's more important than the king, but because of the special place she has in the king's heart. The king bows to his mother. Then he sits on his throne and he brings out a seat designated for his mother. And she sits at his right, which is a position of royal authority and power, not in conflict with the king, but almost like um, complementary to the king. The question is, why isn't it his wife, the queen? Why is it the queen mother and not King Solomon's wife? A few reasons. Um, First, in the West, the queen is the wife of the king, right? That's in Western cultures. But often in Eastern cultures, kings would marry many wives for political alliances. He may have one true wife, but he may have lots of, we call them like concubines, like politically arranged situations for the sake of peace treaties or benefits to different countries. And when you have a harem or a multitude of women who you may have children with, you want to continue your royal line. And when you have many queens, only one of their sons will become king, and so it becomes infighting. It becomes pretty dramatic, and historical records in different cultures kind of show that there's like battles and warfare between different queens who all want their child, their sons, to be the next king. And so, in order to reflect stability in the East, the queen is not the wife. The queen is the mother, because every king would only have one mother, though he may have many wives. So hopefully that makes sense. But here's an image of what Jesus and Mary will look like, and an image of the Catholic view of how we enter into the king's court, and to his right sits his mother, who he loves, and then he gives her to be our mother. And so now, not only do we have our king, Jesus, but we also get to be part of his family in this much more intimate way. And so when we ask Mother Mary for prayer, and I often do that in class, it's not because I can't ask the king, but it's because the king has offered me a lot of different family members, including saints, that will take my petitions and pray with me and unite them to her son. And there's actually a story of this happening where uh, a, a particular person brings a petition to the king, it's declined, and then brings it to the queen mother. And the queen mother then presents it to the king. And the king, happy that his mother continues to be a mother to his people, grants that petition. All right, let's look at another secondary feature. That's the position of the prime minister. There are 12 tribes of Israel, and between the 12 tribes of Israel, each with their own hierarchy and leaders, there is a prime minister that acts, that serves as the king's representative to his tribes. And that's a key position. And here's a long Bible passage, but read it with me. This is a particular story of a prime minister who failed at his job and is being removed, and that position is going to be given to a new person. What's really important is not that this prime minister failed, it's that one, it's a known position. Two, when an individual fails at it, the position doesn't disappear, it's given to another. So let's read. Thus says the Lord of God of hosts, come, go to this steward, to Shebna, who is over the household, and say to him, Shebna is the prime minister in the story, say to him, what have you to do here, and whom have you here, that you have hewn here a tomb for yourself, and you who hew a tomb on the height, and carve a habitation for yourself in the rock. Kind of like saying, Shebna, like, you know that you had a position, a place within this household, within the household of the king. Um, but behold, the Lord will hurl you away violently, O you strong man. He will seize firm hold of you and whirl you around and round and throw you like a ball into a wide land. And there you shall die, and there shall be your splendid chariots, your shame, you shame of your master's house. So it's like, Shebna, you know you've been corrupt and you've been cheating, even though you've been given this elevated position and a place of trust. So I will thrust you, God says through the prophet to Shebna, I will thrust you from your office, and you will be cast down from your station. In that day I will call my servant Eliakim, the son of Eliakim. This is going to be the new prime minister. And I will clothe him with your robe. So I'm going to take these images, these symbols of your position, your robe, and will bind your girdle on him and will commit your authority to his hand. And see, here's the key thing, the prime minister will be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the house of Judah. Another word for father is papa. And another word for papa is, you guessed it, pope. And he shall be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to the house of Judah, the house of David. And I will place on his shoulders the key of the house of David. And he shall open, and none shall shut, and he shall shut, and none shall open. Which means this new person, Eliakim, will be given the role of a father figure to all the tribes of Jerusalem, including David's own household. And he will give him David's key, a symbol of David's own kingly authority, will be given to the prime minister so that the prime minister can act on behalf of the king to his people. And this image of he shall open, none shall shut, and he shall shut, none shall open, that's really important too, because that's an image, again, of authority, that certain rules, decrees, and laws, when he, the prime minister, says it, it's on behalf of the king. And I will fasten him like a peg in a sure place, and he will become a throne to his father's house, and they will hang on him the whole weight of his father's house, the offspring and issue, every small vessel, from the cup to the flagons. In that day, the Lord of hosts, the peg that was fastened in a sure place will give way, be cut down and fall, and the burden that was upon it will be cut off, for the Lord has spoken. This image of the prime minister, of the office of the prime minister, is a foreshadowing of St. Peter, the first pope. Remember, Jesus calls 12 apostles, and of the 12, he elects one throughout the New Testament. Very clear that Peter is unique, and he gives Peter, not because of his strength, but because of his faith, a position among his friends, the other 12. And that position is to be like a father figure. And that position continues throughout history in what we call the office of the Pope. So let's look here. The steward to the king, prime minister to the king, is identified as a father to the people, was given keys to the kingdom, and had the ability to act on the king's behalf, to shut and open. That's religious and administrative powers. And this position was secured by God and greater than any individual person who occupied it. So the position is greater than the person, which means if the person fails, the position moves forward and another person will get that spot. Okay, make sure that you write down from here what's bolded and then also this last portion that I wrote down. Go. All right. Another secondary feature. Oh, kind of cool. Also, this language of, and they will hang on him the whole way to his father's house. The he shall open and none shall shut, and he shall shut and none shall open. Again, in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 16, verse 18, Jesus takes those 12 apostles on a 3-day journey to the north, and they stand before this huge mountain dedicated to a pagan god. And Jesus says to the apostles, "Who do people say that I am?" It's like taking a survey. And they have all these ideas of what they've heard people say. And then Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am? 3 years of hanging out with me, who do you say that I am?" And Peter, inspired by the Holy Spirit, says, "The Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "Yes, good job, Peter. That didn't come from you, didn't come from human wisdom, it came from God." And then Jesus changes Peter's name. Peter is now called Rock. And Jesus says to Peter, he's going to build his church on Peter. And then he says to Peter alone first that I will give you the keys to the kingdom. And what you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and what you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. It's a direct image of the prime minister's role in the Old Testament. Those 12 apostles knew exactly what Jesus was referring to. Jesus, in selecting 12 apostles, is completing, perfecting what King David did between himself, the king, and his 12 tribes, elects a prime minister to act on his behalf. And that position is greater than any person, which is why when Peter dies, you can see the position of the papacy or the father figure, the Pope, move throughout history until this very day with Pope Francis. Another secondary feature is the Thanksgiving offering. It's called the Todah offering. Psalm 50 describes it. Do I eat the flesh of bulls? Do I drink the blood of goats? No, God is saying, I don't need your animal sacrifices. What I want is a sacrifice of thanksgiving, and pay your vows to the Most High, and call upon me in the day of your trouble, and I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. So this Thanksgiving offering became the more important sacrifice of Israel, more important than the Passover meal, which they've been celebrating since the Passover, where the angel of death passes over, and if the blood on the doorposts weren't there, then the firstborn would die. But the Todah offering became more prominent, and it slowly began to foreshadow a future sacrifice of thanksgiving. So in Hebrew, it's called Todah. Okay, it's more important, celebrated rather than a sin offering, which was a bloody sacrifice, and was celebrated with unleavened bread and wine. Again, you can see where this is going. This is an image of the Eucharist. And there is this prophecy that when the Messiah comes, no other offering but the Todah would be offered, that only the Thanksgiving offering would go on forever. Here's the cool thing. Greek-speaking Jews would translate the word Todah to Eucharistia. This is why in the Catholic Mass we call it the Eucharist. This is why we don't re-sacrifice Jesus in the Mass. It's a sacramental offering of the full body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus, who dies on a cross once and for all. And that sacrifice is now represented to us in its power in a Thanksgiving offering, which is what Father Jim does when we celebrate the Mass. All right, let's look at Solomon's wisdom as another secondary feature. The son of David will inherit the throne. And so the son of David will be King Solomon. And there's a whole bunch of piece of stories that we have to skip over, but we're getting to this moment where God meets Solomon and essentially asks Solomon, ask for anything. And Solomon says in verse 10 right there, give me now wisdom and knowledge to go out and come in before this people. For who can rule this, thy people, that is so great? So God says, ask for anything. And Solomon says, I want to serve. And to do that, I need wisdom. God answered Solomon, because this was in your heart, and you have not asked for possessions or wealth or honor or life, or like the life of those who hate you, the death of your enemies. And you haven't even asked for your own life to be extended. You've just asked for wisdom and knowledge for yourself, that you may rule over people who I've made you king over. He's going to grant him wisdom and knowledge. I will give you, and not only will I give you your heart's desire, which is a really good desire that a heart should have, I'm going to give you all those other things you didn't ask for. He inspired the wisdom literature in the Bible. That's like the book of Psalms, the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. Um, his wisdom creates an imperial state where Solomon kind of, in an imperfect way, images Adam and Eve's mission, which is to go out into the world and change the world so that it looks more like the garden. Solomon does things unheard of. He marries the Pharaoh's daughter. And in doing so, he's introducing Egypt. Um, it's almost like a reverse of what happened before, where Moses um, enters into the Pharaoh's home. Solomon, in his wisdom, Egypt is coming to him and learning from him, and Egypt is finding security in Israel. We have this image of an international empire, not just a kingdom living within its boundaries, but it's an international empire that's expanding and bringing about the wisdom of Solomon everywhere it goes. But also the downfall later in Solomon's life. Solomon, despite his great wisdom, begins to make political compromises and ends up having over 700 wives and 300 concubines. Symbolically, an imperfect number, the number 300. He begins to invest in armies and navies and builders. Because of this worldwide empire, the Queen of Sheba, just this huge figure in history, comes to Solomon to learn wisdom. But again, something is going on here, and that's Solomon's folly. He does exactly what the prophet Samuel said a future king would do. When we place our hopes in people and not in God, he employs crushing taxes to pay for this international empire. He needs more and more laborers, and so he drafts people into workforces to continue to build this international empire. He breaks their constitution, right? He breaks that very thing that was spoken in the book of Deuteronomy about not multiplying horses, not forcing people into work, never going back to an Egyptian way of life. But in the end, he completes a building project, and that was building the temple. And this is where we're going to kind of come to our conclusion. The first temple is built. That also implies that that temple won't last forever. The first temple is built. It says the building of it's a building of Jewish identity. The temple is the completion of the temple completes this idea of what it means to be Jewish. The temple, the city, the walls, and the scriptures. The temple, the city, the walls, and the scriptures together completed the Jewish identity. It was started built by David's son Solomon, where David says to the Lord towards the end of his life, I will build a house for you. And the Lord says to David, no, I'm going to build a house for you. The temple images the Garden of Eden, which is a really important reality, because in the Garden of Eden is a special place where God and man could be friends and meet. So the temple is a foreshadowing of it's a completion of the Garden of Eden and a foreshadowing of heaven, almost like saying a foreshadowing of Jesus. In the person of Jesus, in his humanity and his divinity, it's like the temple. It's like the Garden of Eden. In the person of Jesus, God and man meet. So like the 7 days of creation, the temple is built to image Eden, and it foreshadows Jesus Christ himself. Okay, Solomon's folly, the prophet warned what'll happen if you ask for that king. Way back in the book of Samuel, and Samuel was vindicated. His prophecy would come true. Solomon would begin to marry all of these foreign wives, and um, eventually the foreign wives you'd marry into their religions and their ideas, and that would change Solomon. And Solomon began to put up statues of foreign gods as a way of like kind of following through on his commitments to some of his wives. This became a great atrocity on Solomon's behalf. And it says, verse 6, Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and did not wholly follow the Lord as his father had done. Eventually, Solomon would be persuaded to worship those foreign gods and would lead his people into idolatry, which is like one of the greatest sins imaginable. But again, it's a sexual sin. It began with him not honoring what God established, is the marriage between a man and a woman. It's continuing that sin of Lamech, if you remember him, the one that began multiple wives, right? And it continues the pattern we have in human history. And so that's it. The royal kingdom is both the high point, and you can kind of already see that it's pointing towards a coming low point in the destruction of that kingdom through David's own choices, and then following those choices in the very lives of characters like Solomon. And we will continue in the next period. All right, thanks. Bye.